Right, guys, welcome back to the Adam Peter Fitness Podcast. Today on the show, I have Andres Allen, who is disruptive strength, holy crap, on Instagram, and he has been a powerlifting coach for damn near, I think, what, 10 years or something like that. Yeah, so he has a lot of
Like 7, 8 years. Yeah.
yeah, so he has a lot of experience. Has gotten a lot of people stronger. Like I know one of his athletes right now, like benches like over 600 pounds, which is insane. But he has a lot of really good insight and experience. So we kind of wanted to talk about this was triggered by something I shared on my stories yesterday about what went wrong, like with my prep. Because I had to make some different plans because I got hurt, etc. With really like sort of the value of periodizing top set and intensity, and sort of specifically the overutilization of singles in a lot of powerlifters programs. Just to give some context behind this, back in January, I benched 369 pounds, and this was like the first block with singles I had. Actually, I did take it back. It wasn't even a singles block. I was looking over it like before this show. I was doing triples, and I randomly hit a single with 369, which is like an all-time PR on a comp pad. And my coach Eric Bodhorn and I, we kind of wanted to see, well, how do I respond keeping like a single in a little bit more on my bench press? And kind of as time went on, I just slowly started to regress to the point where I got a pretty bad pec minor strain. I think that was due to like some technique stuff, to them not being as optimal. But really, I just started to regress, and I think that you'll see this with a lot of powerlifters who use singles for a long amount of time. I think there's a few problems with them. So
You're going to
number
see it
one
more in the
is
next like 2 years or so, as long as this trend lasts. Hopefully we can help hopefully we can help people be a little bit more creative instead of just following these trends, but we're going to start to see this more.
right. I think that it's a really common thing actually, because you hear a lot of times about people like who like singles like year round, and that might work for them, but I think oftentimes Anders and I have seen that people start to spiral, and this is something where I think that it comes down to like just needing like a different adaptive stimulus in order for your body to actually get stronger, because there basically does become like, I hate this term, it's not really true, but also I don't know how else to like to describe it. There's like some adaptive resistance when you get into doing like the
Exactly what I
exact
was
same
thinking of.
thing. So I guess Andres, I'll let you take the mic for now. Like what are your sort of thoughts on singles, and how powerlifters should be approaching their top set periodization?
Yeah, I mean, just like any other like modern powerlifting coach who's paying attention to the trends of like, listen, I'm not a research guy. Like, I've never thought that we are in the science profession. Some people think that they are, or like I've heard people say that they're science adjacent. I don't think that's true at all. I think if you really want to be successful as a coach, my approach has been to say, hey, what is working right now on the cutting edge of those lifters that are doing the best? Right, or those coaches that are doing the best, right? What is some commonalities between what they're doing? And I think a mistake is looking at a small cluster of coaches, right? We have these like cabals or clusters of coaches, right? Like we have the, PRS Performance, Sean Ray, Swolfester kind of circle, right? And then you have like, circles in like untested powerlifting, right? They come from old school ideals, which I think there's a lot to learn from them. And you're going to start to see, and then you have, Joey Flex and that kind of circle of coaches there. So, you could be really tempted to like kind of pick one and say, okay, they're doing really well. Let me like copy what they're doing. And I think that's along the right direction of places to go. I think that's not a bad place to go because it's like, hey, if you copy the, or learn from, more people are copying than learning from, unfortunately, and a lot of, especially the younger coaches, especially as we see people that are completely unqualified. You and I have a very, very rich background in coaching, right? But you'll see people that have come from zero background in coaching, just, what context do they have? They're going to have to copy because they don't understand principles. We understand principles, right? That's the big difference. But anyway, all that to say, I don't think that's a bad approach to say, hey, here are my mentors, here are people that I look up to, gel with their content, personality, whatever. But I think that's a big mistake. I think one of the reasons why I'm very successful with a very, I don't know if you've seen my roster, but it's very diverse, right? I have masters lifters, I have untested lifters, I have huge guys, I have very small guys, right? And everyone in between, and everyone's progressing, right? And I think one of the reasons I'm able to do that consistently is because, and enjoy doing it, is because I look at everybody. I learn from untested powerlifting. I learn from, the modern powerlifting, like Powerlifting Now guys. I've had Sean Noriega coach me. I've had Kyle Kabuki coach me. I've had a lot of influence from the Kabuki guys and those ideas as well. Chris Duffin and Brandon Sen and those kind of guys. So I think a big mistake that is leading to these types of trends, which, like, just watching your training, like, I don't know how close you watch other coaches training, but like, I'm a fan of yours, so it's like following your training and seeing you struggle with this, and being able to kind of see trends in your program because you're so consistent with posting. It's just kind of cool to see, like, okay, like, what went wrong in these things like that, and kind of thinking about things that could fix it as you are. And obviously the singles got stale, right? So um, we're going to start to see that trend of like overuse of singles, and I think there was an underuse of singles, right? Because powerlifting used to be what, untested conjugate guys, right? So while they were using singles, it was just the spectrum has swung, the pendulum has swung, and you're going to see powerlifting is like, you know, it's like a circle of trends, right? You're going to see exercises come into fashion, then come back into fashion 10 years fucking later, right? So the pendulum has swung from way too non-specific, right? Especially for, younger tested, younger tested powerlifters, being non-specific is pretty shitty, right? So now the pendulum has
It's
swung
funny
to
with
being
that because
mega
like
specific,
it used to be like you got jacked and then you powerlifted, which is like that's
which
how
is
I
what I
got
did.
into
This is why my
like
bench
the
is good.
sport, right? Like because people will always be like how do you like how do you look like a bodybuilder? I'm like because I did bodybuilding for like 5 years
Yeah,
before I even found like the actual sport. But I think that you're absolutely right in the fact that it's okay to sort of copy coaches. I think if you're still learning, but the main thing is sort of looking at trends. It's really powerlifting coaching is high level auto regulation, and like because I take notes on my training. I take note, I post really everything that I'm doing just to
that's
be
one of the
completely
things that I
like
look up to you the
transparent.
most, and I think that something that people can learn from you the most is how fucking meticulous you are, right? So it allows you to if you aren't meticulous and you aren't logging your training, as a lot of newbies that don't have a sport background are, when you have issues like you have, it's very hard to troubleshoot, right? But when you have all the data that you have in front of you, very easy.
I can look back, like I looked back at like my last meet prep, which was like the strongest I'd ever been. I was just hoping to get back to like that point going into this meet because if I didn't cut, I probably could have hit, another 20 kilos on my total. And I was like, like what happened there? And like I had like a period where I did singles like for about 2 blocks, but like how I peaked last time and how I kind of use singles in like a meet prep context, if like there's one or two ways to do it. I think you can have like if you want to really just get as strong as possible for most athletes, I think they have like one good singles block. And I think most people actually do peak very fast within whatever rep range that they are using. But like last time, I kind of just like, okay, we're going to do two good blocks of singles, near max or at max single, that one block out, and then that last block just got ramping up in the exact same way that you kind of did, maybe 5 pounds more to sort of like replicate that trend going into your meet. But like what you said, I think that everything kind of comes in cycles. Like singles, like year round, like the whole like fatigue singles approach and all this stuff. Like there are always these trends that do arise. I think that's because like people do respond well to them. But I think the real key with powerlifting training is developing a macro cycle plan for your athlete where they can get stronger in 3 months. And how can
100%.
they consistently add that? In my opinion, I used to have like the whole opinion like, oh, like it's okay to have it's normal to have blocks where like you don't like really progress. And I think if you're coming out of like a meat prep or you're detrained, yeah, like the first block back, if you have a PR, that's cool, but it's not exactly the expectation. But in my opinion, if you're not setting 5 to 10 pound PRs every single training block, then something's wrong with your
Yep,
programming
100%.
or how you're
100%.
approaching your like how you progress
And just
weights.
because it's normal to plateau a lot doesn't mean that's ideal. And especially if you're paying a coach, we're both expensive. It's like if you're paying us and you're not progressing, like, that's a fucking problem. You know what I mean? And that's something to be fixed. And that's like one of the best parts of our job. That's what really is the most stimulating, and why I still give a shit about this and why I haven't changed careers is because solving those problems is just so fun. And sometimes coming out with like out of the box solutions. Like, again, watching the pendulum swing back, like, I've had some fun incorporating the a slingshot back in my athletes training. I used to use this fucking 8 years ago, personal training, when I first discovered it and like got into powerlifting. Mark Bell was like popular and shit, you know. He's kind of sunsetting right now, but hey, he's the meathead millionaire, so he doesn't really give a fuck. So good for him. But I kind of just used the slingshot to break, one lifter's bench plateau. So it's like that's not something you're going to see in like modern powerlifting with this hyper specificity, but I predict you're going to start to see some conjugate type elements swing back. You're going to start, especially as gyms. I was thinking about this the other day, looking around game day. I was like, this gym is exceptionally well equipped, and it wasn't here 3 years ago before I moved to Austin, right? So you're going to start to see as powerlifting becomes more popular and gyms become more well equipped. I remember going out and buying chains at Home Depot and measuring them. It's not even that fucking hard. It wasn't even that expensive. As an up and coming personal trainer, I was able to afford that and do that. So, and chains, you can break a fucking bench plateau with chains, especially someone like you. That's another thing with overuse of singles. It's like it's almost becomes like a process of elimination. So if you're a coach that only uses singles, right, you're going to see a lot of success. But there's this survivorship bias, right? Because if you give someone like me, look at me, I'm pretty well built for bench, like let's be honest, versus you, like, and that we're all built differently, right? So if you have someone like you give a singles block over and over and over, and me, let's say we have the same coach, singles block over and over and over, and I have a good bench and I show off, and the coach shares me and whatever, and your bench is mid or whatever, and they don't share it, right? And then they're able to get more benching clients, maybe people that are more gifted at bench, right? And then they build this roster of people that are doing a lot of singles and responding well to singles. But is that because the programming is good, or is because they're kind of almost starting to self-select for people that respond to that type of program, almost like the Bulgarian system back in the day, right?
Right.
Is it because that system was so good, or is it because it was so hyper specific to only genetic elite, right? And it doesn't mean like just because you're not necessarily built for bench doesn't mean that if you tune a program for yourself that you can't eventually get as good or better than me at bench because you're so meticulous, right? And I'm like not the most consistent, right? So you could probably blast past me, but only if your program is tuned to you, right? That does that make sense? So that's
Right.
something like people got to think about, and also like from a sales perspective, right? If you have 3 months to get, let's say some people that join us are very bought in from the jump, right? That client, they come in,
Yep.
they're excited to work with you. They know some of your clients, they've been following you for a while, they probably listen to your podcast. If you say jump, they'll say how high, right? And some clients are like kind of mid, or some clients are kind of like a little skeptical, right? Or a little bit neurotic, right? They need to really understand the process, right? If you give them in their first 3 months singles from the jump, right, and they make a lot of progress, they might not necessarily respond the best to singles versus someone who's more built to bench like me, but they're gonna probably hit PRs pretty rapidly, wouldn't you say? Because it's so specific,
Well,
right?
one of the things
But what if
I
they
found
plateau after?
with people who respond really well to singles, like what you said, one, they have good leverages for it. Like I have the best leverages for my deadlift. My deadlift can
Hmm.
respond to singles usually actually pretty well. Everything else though, like squat and bench press, not really. The other person I think responds well to singles are the like what you said, those newer clients that are they're not as neurologically like maxed out.
Mm,
Because I will give them a lot of my beginners actually very frequent singles because they're progressing so rapidly and it's super motivating. But then more advanced guy, it's more sort of like a block periodized approach. And
100%.
it's funny because my coach Eric Modern, I'm powerlifting now, and I pay attention to all of these trends in coaching like you do. And bro, Eric, everything in his program is like since 2021, I've worked with him. He's I mean at the cutting edge. Like he
Yeah,
has the approach,
that's very
and so
important.
like that's why I stick with him, and that's why like a lot of my programming is like influenced by him. I think it's important to have that influence. But it's just about paying attention to athlete response and seeing like whether they see their momentum. And personally, myself, I'd rather like make smaller changes and have like a progressive like periodized macro cycle where like for myself, honestly, like if I was to give myself, I want to give the most progress in one time, I'm going to do 5 4 3. That's what I'm going to do. I
Yeah,
respond best to that
it
range.
fucking works, man. It works.
But then, and that's the thing is like, like I just respond better to higher reps. My body just, I feel so much better. I recover better. I get all my momentum there. I can dip down to those lower reps, but like that, 3 to 1 rep is like, I
You
have
got
like
a limited
one
amount of time.
block. I
You got
have
a
one
limited amount of
block
time.
in that. Yep.
Gotcha. Yeah, yeah. If I can give a specific example, and maybe you can think of some as well. I have this client, Matt, and after his meet, you know how like a lot of clients will have a period of like low motivation, or they're kind of beat up, or they're pretty adaptively resisted, if you could say, to singles, heavy weights, things like that. But Matt was an exception. We had great squat momentum going into the meet, and we had great squat momentum going out of the meet. It was crazy. Whatever I did, he progressed. I gave him top sets of 4. He fucking killed it. Gave him top doubles. He killed it. I gave him like a 3 singles at like a lower RPE, and he still killed it and made progress. And then we did like a singles block and another singles block, and he ended up hitting like 525 squat. And then since that, after that, he kind of like died out. And then I was like, okay. And now we got a fucking meet in 2 months. So I got to figure out how to like resensitize him and get him back to peak strength. So it's like, you got to be, you got to be careful about when, I guess, just when you peak people, right? I'm big on like, I'll use top sets of 4 a lot on squats, top sets of 5 occasionally. I'll do top sets of 3, top sets of 2. Like, I know you said for a lot of people, you'll want to do like 1 singles block. I find for the average person, I can probably do 2, especially if the first one, if they're not overzealous and I can keep them capped and they don't blow their load
Right.
on that first block of singles. That's very important, because otherwise you can run into issues, and then it's tough to peak. But I usually find I can do, like, for the average person, 2 blocks of singles. Some people even 3, and some people even longer. But I really love, using, top doubles. I'm big on, like my client Janrik. He's prepping for Southwest regionals right now, and he just hit. We're pushing top triples on squat. He just hit 617 for 3. Top doubles on deadlift. He just hit like what, 705 for a double, and his PR is only 735. So he's got a fucking PR in the tank already. So it's like, learn how to use, and it's also more fun and more creative. Okay, top set of single, RP7 again. It's like, I don't know, man. It's just kind of boring to program. I think it's fun and more creative to just like make up shit. Like, you guys got to just understand, speaking to the younger coaches, like, you can just make shit up. Like, there's principles, like, and seek to understand the principles. And again, copying and getting influence from your coach or other coaches or free programs, like, that's great. That's a great way to learn. But understand that, once you know the basic like guidelines, there's no hard and fast rules. You can make shit up. You can use the top set of 3, you can use the top set of 5, you can use the top set of 6, whatever the fuck. you know
It's about, like what we said with your one client, like, you have to like create that momentum going into like a meet, right? And just kind of figuring out, those trends. And I think for you, like a very easy fix with that client is go back to the higher volume, and then you just dip down just into a singles block, probably respond just fine. And one of the things, like, a good example of a client of mine who we kind of realized, like, every single time he touches singles, he just sputters. And so you kind of do a very linear approach. And he also is like, like most athletes, especially as you get stronger, those higher intensities become even more fatiguing. So, keep within that RP 5 to 7 range or something like that on top sets. And we
so
basically did
wow,
that
so he's super submaximal. Okay,
very,
interesting.
very. So like for his blocks, it'd be like a 6 to 7 top set going from like 5 4 3 2 with like this like a 3 by 5. And we just run that the exact same setup. Well, and then he makes really good
That can
progress with
work
that.
forever. It stays really fresh, and it's kind of motivating to the athlete, because you're like, okay, last time I did 5s, I topped out here. Let me beat my rep PR. I find that to be so motivating for myself and
That's how
him.
Bryce Lewis programmed for himself. With Eric Helms. That's how I got the idea from. Was Bryce like also had a hard time like responding to the same like rep range over time. But going off of what I just said, I had to get him singles practice going into his meet. I think that's very valuable. And again, Eric Vodden very much thinks that too. And so I was like, well, he doesn't really respond very well on his top end. And so I was like, let's give him like a top triple and then a fatigue single. And he's been doing great on
Wow,
his top
awesome.
sets of the top singles. And that's one of those
That's
things
great.
that's like,
That's
well,
very
like that's
creative.
very
Yeah.
weird, but it's like if it works, it works. And I think that, also identifying, like, again, like it's all about identifying like where do those people like get their momentum from. And I think a lot of times like it has to be periodizing in the right sequential manner, and like wherever they're able to get like the most momentum. And that's where I think block periodization does come into play, because higher volumes, if you can get stronger with higher volumes, and then you slowly get down into like a lower volume rep range, I mean, you're probably going to be a little bit more a little more higher work capacity, but are able to actually tolerate it for longer. And I think that like the repetition sensitivities conversation has value. But I really think that a lot of powerlifters are just about periodizing things, so they're not doing the same thing over and over again. I truly think that's it. Even if it's just like changing like one rep range, or you keep the exact same primary day, but your secondary day is slightly different. It's about giving that very slightly different stimulus that's going to allow them to progress and also stay psychologically engaged in the process.
That's huge. I think that's especially underrated these days, and you're seeing a lot of coaches come in. And this is like concerning to me because I have a very rich like personal training background. So I've trained hundreds of people, had really good relationships with them. I think uh, it's just more conducive to building relationships. Not that you can't build really good relationships with people online. I have, but it's just different, and you're not seeing as much engagement with like the psychological and lifestyle aspects as you would like from people with personal training backgrounds. So you're seeing these new coaches come with a much less context on like the kind of psychosocial like lifestyle aspects of coaching people. Um, and unless you're training super elite, like super consistent athletes, that's going to be most of their fucking progress, not the beautiful, most optimized program. Figuring out those lifestyle factors, getting them out of their own way is going to be a big thing. So, um, that's definitely one of the issues. I forgot what fucking point I was about to make. What were we talking about?
Just like I was talking about variation and how I
Oh,
think that
yes,
programming just needs to
exactly.
be meaningfully different over time.
Exactly. And how that relates to programming is, I've heard somebody say powerlifting is a decade sport, and I keep repeating it because it's very important to realize that we need to progress people in a long term. And if they're doing these long drawn out kind of programs that kind of seem like the same thing every week and every month, and like these blocks kind of flow into each other, and it's like kind of the same thing over and over and over again. Like if you're a robotic, super meticulous athlete like you, I think that'll work really well. Not to like pigeonhole you, but like I think some people are just like have this elite mentality and will just shut the fuck up and like do it. Not to say that you aren't human, but like I think you have like that's a special quality that you have that not
I
everybody
don't
seems
think
to
people
have.
understand like how much fatigue I was dealing with this entire prep, like with
Yeah.
my like with how like my GI issues, and then like not having a lot of time to put together like a decent prep.
I think
Like
your
I was
average
just
person
really
would have
pushing
given up
hard.
like 2 months ago.
My friend Joe had like a GI flare up with like he got sick, and like he was like, bro, like I would have quit like immediately. I'm like, I'm still here. I'm still
Exactly.
kicking. And that's also one of the things one thing I do want to say, it's normal to have strength fluctuations. And this is just a downward strength fluctuation for me. Doesn't mean I still don't have that strength potential to build, and have a 370 bench. But the reality is that adverse, very, very, very normal to have strength fluctuations. For example, very typical for applying at the beginning of a block to be like 5% weaker, like
Yeah.
then
Yeah.
when they hit peak condition. And that's also why we see the periodization of, you have the reactive training systems approach of like top set of, at 8, and that works for some people, but it just doesn't work best for most people. And that's why the meta is that ramping from lower intensities to higher intensities. Because in my opinion, the only time you should touch those like high intensities, like an RP9, is when you're in a peak condition. You can actually
Yeah,
like
you've been
take
talking about
advantage of
that more, and
it.
I found that interesting. Because like just looking at my roster, and I've had a lot of competitions recently, and it's just like, I think one of the skills that I want to work on next is just peaking everybody a little bit more consistently. Because sometimes I've always been proud of my ability to peak people, but just like occasionally I'll see something go flat, and I'm like, fuck, man, I just like did not individualize this peak, and I just assumed they'd respond like somebody else. And it's fun when you really nail a peak and you just see like during warm-ups. You ever see somebody during warm-ups and you're like, oh my God, the strength
Yeah,
fucking showed up today, you know? And you can, obviously, compensate with good attempt selection. It's like, hey, if the deadlift fell flat, you kind of fucked at the peak, you can fix attempt selection, whatever. But there's, the work's already done at that point. You're just
yeah.
kind of salvaging it, so to speak. But like, um, you know, I like that idea. And I've had people go like very sub-maximally like that, and they've peaked beautifully. And I think, you can fly closer to the sun and get really strong and really go for PRs. But sometimes, that'll cause you to fall flat. And I've definitely trained more sub-maximally in the past. and it does work for some people. So it's kind of fun to experiment with that, and it's cool to see you say that. Just like, hey, like, touch these higher intensities much less often, and get the work on the back end. And I think that also
That's a
causes your
huge one,
athletes to
man.
feel better. I think you just feel better
Yes.
because when you're
Well, like,
when you're you're in the peak and you're grinding and all your joints hurt, it's like hardcore. And for like a baby PR or even a match on the platform, it's like, fuck, man, what was that all that for? Versus submax where you just smash and lift, smile on your face, and then you come in the meet and you hit a fucking 10 kilo PR, and then you're feel good to train after. Isn't that a better scenario?
something that Brendan Papin and I talk about, working with momentum powerlifting, because we talk all the time. It's one of my best friends. We don't really like changing our down sets on our primary days because like our whole goal is to be able to add 5 to 10 pounds to our down sets like every single block
Yes.
for athletes. That's the majority of your stimulus. And if that's going up by 5 to 10 pounds, your top end's probably going to show up with that. And I think it's also about keeping appropriately some maximal on that balance on those down sets, and really just keeping that as well. Like we don't really keep our down sets too different than our top set intensity in the beginning of a block. But as we get further on the block, we might cap our intensity. It goes like a little bit of a larger gap because with the velocity loss research, around a 7 is about like the cap for like for most people where before they're starting to get like a trade off with fatigue and stimulus. But like as the top set intensities get higher, just keeping that a little bit more some max, and that's really easily done by just adding 10 pounds per week to your down
Yep.
sets on like squat and deadlift, and 5 pounds to your bench press. And as long as the top end is going up and you're feeling better. And by the way, like I do think if you have a very squat bench like heavy approach, you're not doing a lot of accessories, you will need to push more intensity on your sets. But I don't think that's the meta of where most powerlifters are trained. Is most powerlifters are not built like Russ or
Yeah.
Perk or whatever, who have great leverages for it.
That's
And
tough
pushing
when you see
accessories
younger
is fun.
lifters and they see their idols, or how their idols are like, if they're if they're new and they look at the athlete, okay, cool, they copy them. If they're a little bit smarter, they'll look at what their coach is doing, and it's like, you got to look at the type of, like, if you're training all elite athletes, then hmm, maybe they're all built in an interesting way that can tolerate this more SBD volume. Maybe it's just something to think about. It's just, people got to realize everybody's fucking built different, and it's just like, you think it's so obvious, but people just fucking don't get it.
Right. I want to actually pull up one theme. Is like I love Lyle McDonald, and
Yeah,
he always goes
you
on
just had a podcast interview with him, didn't you?
two actually.
Oh
That's
wow.
just crazy to think about. I've had three in total, but he talks about this a lot because like I think a big thing with powerlifting is like overdoing the volume. Like I think to a certain extent, there's some more sub-maximal approaches, like you can do more, and especially like bench pressing, like it does tend to be like necessary because bench press for some reason just needs more volume. But there's one person that posted about needing like less training volume if you're advanced. And he says, been saying for years that well-trained people need less volume. Give it another decade before the fitness industry realizes I was right. In a bodybuilding sense, you also simply can't put the amount of necessary volume / intensity / overload into all body parts at once. Hence my specialization cycles for 2 weekly or total weekly volume decreases as you focus on two body parts. Whole asinine idea that you need more volume as you get advanced. Rusky crap where the volumes were escalating with the progressive doses. And he also says, like, I said, I absolutely, this has been the case for me. I only do 8 hard sets per muscle group per week after my SBD volume. Just brace some max to begin with, staying within RP 5 to 7 on squat and deadlift and 6 to 8 on bench. And then Lyle says, I mean, we could also hand wave about intensity. Yeah, somebody else pansy about and do 20 half-ass sets of bodybuilding work, which is really just cutting into recovery by pissing about anyhow. Like this
Yeah,
volume
100%.
can go up as you're advanced. You train like Mike Isertail, get everything at warm-up levels, but only works with all the drugs to begin with. But even
Yep.
with the drugs, man, like I will tell you what, not everybody's John Hack. And
No.
John also trains very similarly, like what we're saying. His off season, he doesn't fucking touch singles. And then he
No.
goes in 10 weeks before prep, pops on Anadrolin and Anavar, and blows up and does 2 blocks of progressively heavier singles, but he doesn't blow his load on the first one. It's
No.
like an RP
No, he
9
doesn't.
single. Then it's basically near
He's
max
crushing them.
going into his meet.
Yep. 100%. And it
So you
keeps him
don't need a
fresh, I'm
lot of
sure.
volume.
He's touching insane
And
weights.
yeah, well, and like his down sets, like you watch like his videos, he'll do like a top set like 900 pounds, just fucking ridiculous, and do like down sets of 640.
Which is crazy, right?
But I think also as you get heavier and as you get stronger and stronger, the ejective load going up is all that really matters. That's what data driven strength kind of says. It's like, the intensity doesn't matter as much as you're able to get the volume of the load on the bar progressively going up and up and up. And that's really what matters.
100%. I couldn't agree more. And as far as accessory work, starting to see a trend of more like bodybuilding, like intensity techniques, like myo reps and shit, and just getting more out of less, which I
Drop
think,
sets too.
yeah, yeah, and I think you got to be careful with that, because I worked out with a bodybuilder the other day, Carlos, and he fucking smoked me on high rep hamstring drop sets and shit, and I had to like move my second training session a couple days before
Right.
because you're gonna have recovery issues. But I think it can also really save you, as far as like your total volume, because I've definitely edged into like junk volume for both myself and my clients before, because I'm like, hey, like I take this shit very seriously and the results are very serious. So I'm like, if I'm looking at the board of like the microcycle of training, I'm like, I don't want to miss a single fucking thing. I don't want to miss a single muscle group or stimulus or, so I used to err on the side of like doing too much. And as I progress, I'm a little bit more like stingy with my training volume. I'm like, do I really fucking need this? And erring on the side of just cutting it the fuck out, because you can always add it later. What I've realized is, um, if you feel like something is missing from the training program, you can always add it later. But if you add too much, it takes a while to recover, man. If you tweak something, or if you're feeling too beat up, or if you lose momentum in training, it's really hard to get that back. So maybe it is better to err on the side of a little bit less sets, and less junk volume and a little bit more intensity, and then you can always tweak that over time. You can always add volume.
Right. I also think if you're adding volume, we're talking like adding a set. Like we're not talking about adding like five
Yes.
sets. I
Yes.
say all the time with Alex, like, I need more volume. I'm like, one more set of triceps, one more set of a pressing accessory. We'll start there.
Yes.
Especially if they're built
Exactly.
like myself, like it's like, maybe that more straight bar bench work is really hard on your shoulders and your chest.
Yes.
But if you add in like a machine chest press or incline dumbbell press, it's like, oh, like I can do so much more work. And by the way, that's also why bodybuilders are so damn jacked, is they can do more volume because they're not doing these barbell lifts that really beat them up. And I really think that one thing that is important, with accessory work is looking at the lifter. Are you built well for that lift or not? How well can you tolerate that? How much skill practice do you really need? Like, are you a motor moron, or are you pretty athletic and you already kind of know like how to move? That's going to really drive
That's a
a lot
huge factor.
of your decisions regarding how much specificity you actually leverage in your programming. I'm very athletic. I do not need a lot of volume to really like know how to move. For me, it's just about getting enough volume exposure and recovering enough. And with my program, my total weekly sets for squat is 7, but I do about
Wow.
7 sets of accessories. That I push those like RP9 to like 10 on like all of them. And
Wow.
then my
Okay.
weekly benching volume is about 10 sets per week. Then I do about 6 sets of additional accessories. My deadlift volume is literally about, if I'm doing like conventional deadlift on my primary day, it's 6 sets of deadlifts. And then I just do a fuck ton of back work and hamstrings. And that's what I do. And that's kind of what I bias towards a lot of people who are not built like, really well at powerlift. And also just it's more fun for me. Like Brendan Pappa is making the best progress he ever has because he's using more accessories and less specificity on his training
Yep.
than ever. And he enjoys
He's
it more.
killing it. So it's
I
fucking smoking
really
shit.
do 100%. I really do think enjoyment is like it's not the NLBL, but it's a big factor because if you're psychologically like, hell yeah, I have like 3 sets of squat, and then I'm going to go absolutely ham on leg press and leg extensions and lunges, and you're just excited about that versus like, yeah, I have 8 sets of squat, and then I go home.
Dude, I want to blow
Like,
my fucking brains out.
oh
Seriously.
yeah, and like
That goes
I
back
had a
to saying
point.
that, powerlifting is a decade sport, and the psychological factors of it. It's like, hey, if your client loves that specificity, fuck yeah, they're gonna do it for the decade. If they hate it, dude, they're gonna have 2 years, they're gonna be frustrated, they're gonna be burnt out, they're gonna be beat the fuck up, and they're gonna go fucking do jujitsu. You know?
Absolutely. Or they get, in my case, and one of the things I think about, we also have to ask ourselves, we all want the fastest progress possible,
Yes.
but it should be the fastest progress possible without getting hurt. Because if you get hurt, it takes so long to rehab from. And that's why, like,
Your PR
I
is
love
zero.
working with like Eric because Eric is so progressive. with like his volume. I mean, he's worked with Chance Mitchell and Chrissy Faraci, and those guys got hurt a lot because they're
Does
pushing
Chance
volume
Mitchell
a
still
lot.
exist? That's what I want to know.
According to Eric, yes.
Okay.
But he's like doesn't know exactly know like where he is, but like he knows that he's at least there. But yeah, hopefully he comes back. He just fell off the map. But I think that just starting off with that lower volume and then only seeing like also like gauging like your response, like because like sometimes if you have like one of the things I'll have with a lot of my athletes coming to me is like they feel really beat up. I look at their volume, it's like not that egregious, but then I look at how they're training their squat, bench, and deadlift, and it's not very maximal. Well, then maybe you just do that, and all of a sudden they're PRing again. But I think that that's actually
Nice.
a really
Just
big
that one
point is
little
that you
tweak. Yeah.
teaching your clients how to train with the current volume that they have is number one. Because if they're not executing the program properly, you can't change the program. Once you know they're executing the program properly, then you ask them how they're feeling. Then your job as a coach is to interpret that information and problem solve.
That's your flow chart. Yep. I think that's very important to have.
Well, cool. I think this is a good conversation.
Yeah,
Lots
it's
of stuff to
great.
like sort of think about. So thanks for being willing to come on. If people
Yeah,
want
it
to
was
hire you,
an
follow
absolute
you,
blast.
where should they go?
Yeah, on Instagram at Disruptive Strength is the best place to find me, and I look forward to more conversations. Maybe I'll have you on my podcast. It'll be fun.
Oh yeah. Well, I'll make sure I include those details in the show notes. Thank you guys for listening. I'll talk to you guys in the next episode.